take the view that centralised bargaining would be appropriate for the platinum industry, which of course as a result of the recent strike is effectively what happened. But that's another issue we don't have to go into now. But there's some suggestion and material before us that certainly the rock drill operators in the different mines knew quite quickly what their opposite numbers were getting in other mines.
They did get to know.
So I would have thought that it would have been possible for Lonmin, once it was publicly announced that Impala had settled their strike by giving increases, to find out what the increases were. So, okay, it mightn't have been instantaneous. It mightn't have been immediate in the sense that within a few days or so they didn't know. But it wouldn't have been difficult in a matter of weeks to find out what the relevant figures were. That must be right, surely.
That is correct.
Yeah. And so the further point that arises is it would have been sensible, I would have thought, this is a prima facie view I'm putting to you.
Yes.
It would have been sensible, I would have thought, for Lonmin, once they realise, and would have been sensible for Amplats too, of course, once they realise that Impala have given a big increase to their RDOs, there will inevitably be ripple effects of that.
Indeed.
So it would have been sensible for Lonmin to have found out what the increases were. Do you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
And if they'd done that, they should have communicated, the management should have communicated to the non-executive directors as well.
Yes.
And then one can imagine the kind of initiatives you might have taken if that information had been conveyed to you.
Yes,
Am I right?
You're right.
Because, Mr. Ramaphosa, I put it to you that those three facts, the huge differential, the fact that RDOs at Lonmin were deeply dissatisfied and had been for some time, plus the fact that RDOs at Implats had taken matters into their own hands, those three facts together created, in our submission, a recipe for, to use your language of yesterday, a perfect storm.
Indeed.
Do you agree?
I would agree.
And so if you, presumably, you didn't have those facts at the time, and neither did your board, correct?
We did not.
And if your board had those facts at the time, you would have recognized the recipe for the perfect storm. You would have approached management. At the very least, you would have made inquiries about what management was doing in order to deal with the storm when it came, correct?
I would say that we would most probably have said a different approach needed to be taken to address the problem and to more or less get in line with what others had done.
Certainly, so some steps would have to be taken, contingency plans put in place, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, Mr. Ramaphosa, you've testified that you knew prior to the commencement of the strike at Lonmin in 2012 that there had been talks between Lonmin and the RDOs, correct?
I got to know about it when I read Mr. Da Costa's evidence, but it only came to the board just before, I think.
Just before the strike?
Yeah. There is a minute to that effect in the papers.
And you knew, I take it, that those talks had been conducted directly between Lonmin, managers, and the RDOs, and not through NUM, correct?
That detail I did not know, I must admit.
You knew, presumably, that those talks had culminated in Lonmin offering the RDOs an allowance. I think it was referred to in the email that you received as a special bonus, but essentially an allowance of 750 Rand.
That only came to surface to me when the Chief Executive Officer reported to the board.
But prior to the strike?
I think it would have been just prior, yes. Yes, I think that's what the record says.
In any event, that information is repeated in the email that you received on the 11th of August, that an offer was made to RDOs which they rejected. So that was your understanding of what had happened, correct?
Yes.
And then we know that the RDOs embarked on an unprotected strike over the same issue on the 10th of August 2012, correct?
Yes.
Now, let's go to the email that you received.
Moved away from wage increases and so forth, and negotiations.
Yes, I'm coming back there to some
Coming
extent.
back.
But
There were some questions I want to ask, but they may well be the ones you're going to come back to, so I won't ask my questions now.
So, Mr. Ramaphosa, if we could look at quadruple J1, that's the email that you received on the 11th of August, informing you that you say is the first notice you got of the unprotected strike, correct?
Yes.
And that's the email that you got sets out Lonman's response to the strike. At the bottom of the page, it reads, the response of Lonman is to follow disciplinary procedures and, if required, will dismiss the illegal strikers. Barnard is preparing the ultimatum, which they will issue tomorrow, and will terminate contracts of employment should the employees not show up for duty tomorrow. So you understood from that, presumably, that Lonman was not going to engage with the strikers, correct? Mm-hmm. If you could just verbalize your answer, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
And you testified yesterday that you did not agree with that approach. As far as you were concerned, negotiations were the correct way to go and were, in fact, the only workable solution, correct?
Yes.
Now, if we go over the page...
Leave that email, can I? There's something I'd like to put to the witness. The first sentence of Ms. Ntubi's email to you says this. Yesterday, well, the first two sentences. Yesterday, the Lonman rock operators, RDO, at Korea Mine, embarked on an illegal strike demanding more money. This has been on the table with management since the Impala strike earlier this year. Yes. Were you aware of the fact that this had been on the table with management since the Impala strike earlier in the year, which was, we've heard was about April?
No, I was not aware.
Do you think that, that you should have been informed of it at the time?
I would have said yes.
If we, still on that email, if we could just go over the page to the next paragraph of the email. It reads as follows. This is necessary, and that's a reference back to the response that Lonman has adopted to the strike. This is necessary as Lonman has been engaging, or rather had been engaging with the RDOs in trying to address their needs. Secondly, the strike is illegal. And lastly, other workers in the business are watching the situation, and if the RDOs are successful to bargain outside the engagement structures, it will set a very bad precedent. So there, Mr. Ramaphosa, what's essentially being communicated to you are the reasons for the stance that Lonman has adopted in response to the strike, correct?
Yes.
Now, let's look at those reasons. Firstly, you are told that other workers in the business are watching the situation, and if the RDOs are successful to bargain outside the engagement structures, it will set a bad precedent. But now, that has really already happened. Isn't that correct? Lonman has already, the facts are that Lonman has already engaged with RDOs outside the structures and made them an offer, correct?
Indeed.
So that can't be a reason for refusing to speak to the strikers, correct?
That is correct.
The second reason that is given is that the strike is illegal. That's the word that is used. You see that?
Yes.
And of course, that's not correct, is it? Workers don't commit a crime by going on strike, even if it's unprotected.
Chair, that question is rather ambiguous. Does Millennium mean to refer to illegality in the sense of criminality, or simply not protected under the scheme of the labour laws?
What we've done in this commission is we've, over and over again, emphasized that an unprotected strike is unprotected in the sense it's a dismissal following upon it is not an unfair labour practice. So there are consequences which flow from participating in an unprotected strike which don't flow from participating in a protected strike. And we've also, the point's been emphasized over and over again, that strikers do not commit a crime by participating in an unprotected strike. They rather foolishly, some might say, put their head in the noose if they can be dismissed without having a redress. But that's the distinction we draw, and I think that's the point that Mr. Barnes is making. But I take your point. The terminology is a bit imprecise, but I think the main thrust of what Ms. Barnes is putting is clear. If the witness has a problem, I'm sure he'll let us know. But he is one who has himself been involved in many unprotected strikes in the 80s, and he knows very well, I'm sure, the distinction better than you or I do.
Yes, of course, Mr. Ramaphosa, it used to be a crime to participate in a strike that was not in accordance with the legal prescripts. That's no longer the case, correct?
Yes.
So it's accurate and appropriate to refer to an unprotected strike rather than an illegal strike.
Indeed.
Correct. Now, of course, the fact that the strike was unprotected was not, again, in and of itself a reason not to speak to the strikers, correct?
I would agree.
And of course, if a company has a policy that requires it to speak to strikers in the event of an unprotected strike, then they would be obliged to follow that policy, correct?
Yes.
Were you aware that Lonmin had such a policy?
Not the precise parts of it. What we always sought to encourage is that, and this is a situation where they were dealing with one union that they had recognized, and I guess they never really had to deal with many of such strikes in the new dispensation. So they had one port of call, which was the NUM, and in this situation, I think they were traversing uncharted ground.
Well, let me take you to the policy so that you can see precisely what it says. It's Exhibit XXX8. If we could have that on the screen, please.
Quite a lengthy document, I think.
Yes, it's...
give the page number. I think there's a particular section, that chapter.
Paginated page 24. And it's clause 8.3. You'll see that 8.3 deals with the steps that are required to be taken in the event of unprotected industrial actions. There's reference to ultimatums that need to be given. There's reference to application for a court interdict that may be made. And then 8.3.6 describes the formation of a management committee. 8.3.7 describes the formation of a committee from the strikers that will be established in order to speak to management. 8.3.8 goes on to say that that should preferably not exceed 4 people. And then 8.3.9 deals with the fact that an appropriate location must be identified at which talks shall be held. So the witnesses from Lonmin that have testified thus far have confirmed that that's what's envisaged by this policy, is that a committee of management and a committee of the strikers are set up, should be set up and engage in talks, and that was not done in this case. You agree that it ought to have been done?
Well, in terms of this policy, yes, it ought to have been done.
So, Mr. Ramaphosa, if we look at the reasons that were communicated to you for Lonmin's stance in relation to the strike on the 11th of August, surely, sir, you could not have been satisfied with the reasons that were communicated to you for Lonmin's stance. Isn't that correct?
The reasons being?
The reasons being, one, that it would set a bad precedent to engage outside the structures when that had already happened, to your knowledge.
Yes.
And two, that this was an illegal strike. Yes. Surely you would have not considered those to be valid reasons for not engaging with the strikers.
That is correct.
And yet, you didn't take this up with management. You didn't say to management, but these reasons don't stand up to scrutiny. That this is not a basis not to engage with the strikers. You didn't do that. Isn't that correct?
Are you saying so as a matter of fact?
Well, there's certainly no evidence that you did.
I think she's asking you whether that's correct. There should be a question mark hanging over her head after she made that statement.
I did not notice the question mark. There were discussions that ensued, particularly in relation to the suggestion that there could even be dismissals, which, as I said yesterday, opposed to. So those discussions about embarking on an option of dismissals and so forth did happen, and I remember communicating to Ms. Ngube that that is not an option that should be pursued, and there should be discussions.
Did you communicate to Lonman, though, to anyone from Lonman, that there should be negotiations with the strikers?
I remember, and maybe the full detail is not immediately available to me. I do remember talking to Ms. Ngube, who is the Shanduka representative, and I also remember talking to Mr. Barnard, who I would have said to dismissal is not an option as they have already conceived.
Did you say that negotiations are the only option?
Yes, that is my general stance, that negotiations are the only option in matters like these.
And you said so to Mr. Mokoena?
I said so clearly to Ms. Ngube.
And Mr. Mokoena?
I don't recall how the conversation would have gone, but in the course of our discussions that may well have emerged.
So you have no specific recollection of giving that particular message to any Lonman employee?
I do not, I'm afraid.
Now, Mr. Ramaphosa, you've said that you were extremely concerned about the violence at Marikana, correct? Yes, for the moment. Please go ahead, Chair.
One point that was made to the police when they came on the scene on the 13th, in fact to the National Commissioner, I think it was that there was a 2-year wage agreement in place.
Yes.
And there was therefore no basis for negotiating any change until the 2 years were up, which were going to be October 2013.
Yeah.
And that was a point, that was a position which, as far as we could make out from the evidence, was supported by the local branch of NUM. But when Mr. Sekwana came, he said that that was incorrect. The relevant clause in the 2-year wage agreement said that no strike action was possible to enforce a wage demand during the 2-year period. But he said that that didn't prevent negotiation. And he said in appropriate cases, if there'd been a dramatic change in circumstances, negotiation could be, and had in the past been resorted to.
Yes.
And he referred to a precedent from, I think it was around about 2005, as far as I remember, where there'd been a 2-year agreement, I think it was a 2-year agreement, provision for an increase at the end of the first year of a certain percentage. But there'd been a dramatic rise in the rate of inflation, yes, which made that increase meaningless.
Yeah.
And therefore, the NUM adopted the stance that negotiation was possible, despite the fact that the 2-year agreement had not yet run its course, and they did so, and they succeeded in getting a change.
Yes. And
he conceded also, as I understood his evidence, that the increase that the RDOs got at Impala, and then later at Amplats as well, was that kind of change of circumstance which would have justified negotiation.
Yes.
So I take it that's a view that you would agree with as well.
I would agree with that view, Mr. Chairman.
Was the question of the 2-year agreements and the Lonman stance as communicated to the police that negotiations were inappropriate because the 2-year agreement hadn't run its course and that would only be a matter for consideration in October 2013, was that a matter that was raised with you at any stage by the Lonman management?
Not in as direct a way as that. There was a view that once you have that type of 2-year agreement, you need to run through with it until the end and then renegotiate. But I would tend to agree with what Mr. Zokwana was saying and what you are saying as well, that given new circumstances that would have come on the scene, there would be a need to renegotiate to avert a bad situation.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Ramaphosa, you've testified that you were extremely concerned about the violence at Marikana during that period, correct?
Yes.
And the violence that was taking place arose out of the strike, correct?
Yes.
So there was a strong probability that if the strike was resolved, the violence would end, correct?
Yes.
And the cause of the strike was a wage dispute, correct?
Yes.
So there needed to be some mechanism in place in order to deal with the wage dispute, in order to resolve the strike, in order for the violence to end, correct?
I would agree.
And there needed to be some mechanism put in place as a matter of urgency to attend to the wage dispute, correct?
Yes.
Now, surely, Mr. Ramaphosa, you would have been concerned to ensure that that was happening. Is that right?
Yes.
The mechanism that could have been put in place fairly easily would have been the mechanism referred to in paragraph 8.3 of this document. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
See, the peculiar thing, excuse me, Mr. Ramaphosa, is that there was nothing in place at all. Nothing was being done at all in relation to the wage dispute. Lonman refused to speak to the strikers at all, despite being repeatedly requested to do so, not only by the strikers but by the police. You say you didn't know that. Is that correct?
Could you rephrase that question about what I did not know?
Yes, I apologize. It was a long, convoluted question.
Yes, please.
The Lonman refused to engage with the strikers at all, despite being requested to do so by the strikers themselves, the police, Mr. Matunjwa, and Bishop Siorka, to name four parties from whom that request was coming.
Yes.
Sorry, Mr. Chairperson. In relation to Mr. Matunjwa requesting Lonman to engage directly with the strikers, there's no evidence to that effect.
I think that's right. Let's take Mr. Matunjwa out of the question. You don't need him in the question. Carry on with the abridged question.
Let's just stick to the strikers and the police. The police were asking Lonman to engage with the strikers, as were the strikers themselves. Lonman refused to do so. Your evidence is that you did not know that,
Yes,
correct?
I did not.
There wasn't even a meeting organized between Lonman and all the unions together. And I must point out to you, Mr. Ramaphosa, that Mr. Matunjwa's reaction on being informed of the strike on Friday, the 10th of August 2012, his response was to immediately suggest that a meeting be called between Lonman management and all the unions as soon as possible. Were you ever informed of that?
No, I was not informed of that.
And that didn't happen. The first time that Lonman and Amku and Num all sat around the same table was on Wednesday, the 15th of August, and that was as a result of a challenge being issued by a radio talk show host. That meeting was not organized by Lonman. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
So nothing was happening as far as the wage dispute was concerned. No mechanism was being put in place. Nothing was being done. Why did you not establish that, and why did you not establish that nothing was being done?
Well, we had people, as I indicated yesterday, who were dealing with the matter at the level where everything was happening. And I think one can concede that a meeting should have happened, a negotiation should have ensued at that early stage, even before everything escalated into the violence that it did. Yes.
So steps should have been taken at a much earlier stage to deal with the wage dispute.
I would agree with that.
But Mr. Ramaphosa, what I'm particularly interested in is why you didn't find out that nothing was being done and demand that something be done.
Well, as I indicated yesterday and even now, we had people on the executive who were dealing with these matters. And as I said yesterday, as a non-executive director, we delegate all these powers, authority, and matters to the management team who are employed on a full-time basis to deal with these matters.
But Mr. Ramaphosa, presumably if you had known that nothing was being done in relation to the wage dispute, you would have said that this is unacceptable, steps must be taken, correct?
It is possible that any non-executive director would have said so, yes.
So you didn't even ask whether steps were being taken? Because if you had asked, you would have been told that they weren't.
Well, we got reports from where everything was happening that they had met, and Ms. Ngube, who is our representative, was dealing with the matter on an ongoing basis.
So you had no information about what was going on in relation to the wage dispute, and you made no attempt. You made no attempt to get that information personally.
I had no information on an ongoing basis about what was happening.
Mr. Ramaphosa, I see that in the email you got from Ms. Ngube, quadruple J1, page 2 of the your bundle, the last sentence of that email says, "I will keep you updated should the situation get any worse."
Yes.
Did she keep you updated? Were you informed after you received the email from her that, were you informed by her that the situation had got worse?
Yes, she did inform me, and that is when the situation got really worse, when the violence then started unfolding.
Because you see, Mr. Ramaphosa, it seems to us that you expended a great deal of energy on lobbying to have the events at Marikana characterized as criminal and to increase the police presence at Marikana, but yet you did not take a single step to find out what was going on in relation to the wage dispute. Can you explain that?
Well, as I said yesterday, I was being given information of people dying and being killed. And as I indicated yesterday, that represented, in my mind, an emergency situation that needed to be stabilized. And that stabilization would, in my view, then have led to negotiations or discussions or talks beginning to happen to bring the situation to a solution. So I was confronted with information about the deaths and the injury of a number of people. So that is what I reacted to immediately.
I understand that partially, Mr. Ramaphosa, but remember we've earlier agreed that in order for the violence to end, the strike had to be resolved. So it was surely as urgent to make sure that there was at least some sort of mechanism in place in order to begin dealing with the wage dispute. Surely that was the other side of the coin and equally urgent.
I think it is the other side of the coin, but I've also been involved in situations where there have been strikes and where we have made it clear to members of the union that in any strike situation, workers should not resort to violence and attacking other workers and killing them. And during my days at the National Union of Mine Workers, we even went to an extent of writing down strike rules, that during a strike you do not attack other workers, whoever the workers might be. You do not take steps to injure them or kill them. This we did because we said, if you begin to do that, it begins to interfere with the process that you are involved in to win your demands. And the situation that was communicated to me was of an emergency nature that needed to be resolved before the discussions and negotiations could ensue. So in my view, there were then two types of situations. The emergency one, which was the violent actions that were taking place, and the normal one that would have ensued with negotiations.
But surely, Mr. Ramaphosa, there was no reason why those things could not have happened simultaneously. In fact, then you had a greater prospect of bringing the strike to an end more quickly, in which case the violence would end.
Well, I think it is easy to say that they should be dealt with simultaneously. It becomes a bit more difficult if many people are being killed on a daily basis. What you seek to do is to stabilize that so that there is peace and calm and stabilization, and thereafter you are then able to embark on proper, more fruitful discussions.
It appears to us, and we're going to argue this, Mr. Ramaphosa, that you appear to be entirely unconcerned during that week about whether there was a mechanism in place to deal with a labour dispute, even though you have said that you considered negotiation to be the only workable solution. Would you like to comment on that?
I've always been concerned about finding ways of resolving problems through negotiations. I think it is a little bit unfair on your part to say I was unconcerned. I've been more concerned than you can imagine about having people sit down and negotiate their problems and find solutions.
But Mr. Ramaphosa, you have conceded that you did not know what was going on as far as the labour dispute was concerned, and you did not take steps to find out.
I
Isn't
did
that
not
correct?
know. It does not mean that one did not take steps.
Mr. Ramaphosa, you would have heard at some stage about Mr. Zukwana, the president of NUM at the time, attempting to address strikers on Wednesday, the 15th of August 2012, and the very bad reception that he received. Did you hear about that?
Yes, I got to hear about that.
Did you hear about that on the 15th of August, on the day on which it happened?
Yes. I think it could have been on the day or soon thereafter.
It could have been on the day. That must have been very, very distressing for you to hear that.
Yes. I think I would probably have seen it on television as well.
Yes, the answer, the day or soon thereafter, is a bit unclear. I'd just like to clarify one thing.
Yes.
The attempt by Mr. Zukwana to address the strikers was on the reasonably late on the Wednesday afternoon. The killing of 34 people took place on the Thursday afternoon.
That's true.
I take it your answer implies that you knew about Mr. Zukwana's unsuccessful attempt to address the strikers before the shooting on the Thursday afternoon.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, with respect. Yes, I did. And as I recall now, because most of this was being played out on television, I would have seen it on television. And similarly, I would have seen Mr. Matunjwa succeeding in going to address the workers.
Thank you, Chair. Those are our questions.
Thank you, Ms. Barnes. Mr. I understand that in terms of an arrangement between Mr. Mpofu and Mr. Bam, you're going to deal with one topic in cross-examination now, and then if matters arise during the course of his cross-examination, you may seek to cross-examine further in relation to such matters. Is it? That's the understanding.
That's correct, Mr. Chairperson. Mr. Chairperson, may I ask for a short 5-minute adjournment? I'd just like to speak to Mr. Ramaphosa's counsel, Mr. Untalt, about a document that I don't know whether they received or not. He's part of the...
We'll adjourn for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Commission resumes. Mr. Ramaphosa, you're still under oath. Mr. Van As.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Good morning, Mr. Ramaphosa. I act on behalf of Lonman.
Good morning to you.
Mr. Ramaphosa, I'd like to please refer you to Exhibit Quadruple J1.
Will they bring it up?
And if we could just scroll down to the bottom of the document, please. You testified yesterday that this was the email which you received from Ms. Nkube at Shanduka. Do you confirm that?
Yes, I do confirm that.
I'd like to take you to paragraph 1, the third sentence. It says, the RDOs have been demanding what Impala ultimately settled for, which was an increase to 12,000 Rand per month basic salary. Do you see that?
Yes, I do see that.
I'd like to then take you to Exhibit Quadruple X 3.20. I've given you a copy of the document.
Bit lower down, I think. Bit lower down. I think that's the section that you want, Mr. Van As.
Now, Mr. Ramaphosa, I've highlighted I've also given you a hard copy. I've highlighted with a yellow highlighter, column number 1 on table 1 is the current salaries, current remuneration as at July of 2012. Do you see that?
By column, or do you mean the row or the column?
I beg your pardon, you're quite right. The row, going across.
The row, yes.
Lonman.
Sorry, forgive me, Mr. Van As. Someone on the right-hand side has got, I don't know what it is, but it's either the headphones that are on the table so we can hear what's coming out of the headphones, or it's a radio or something. But anyway, it's making a noise, it's disturbing us, making it difficult for us to concentrate on the questions and the answers. So please see to it that doesn't happen again. Carry on, Mr. Van As.
Thank you. This, perhaps I should just set the background. This is a memorandum which Lonman's Human Capital Department sent to Mr. Mark Munro, who was the Executive Vice President Mining, on the 27th of July 2012. If one has a look at row number 1, it sets out Lonman's current basic salary as at July 2012, and you see that's 5,405.
Yes.
And it sets out the total package as being 9,063.
That's correct.
Now, what's more important for the purposes of my cross-examination, if you go to row 2, you've got Impala. And
Yes.
that set out the basic salary as 6,540 and the total remuneration as 9,961.
I see that.
So would it be fair to say that Ms. Nkube was incorrect when she advised you that Impala Rocktrail operators were receiving a basic salary of 12,000 Rand per month in July of 2012?
Yes, on the basis of this, clearly.
And then if I go to if we can go back to triple J1, please. Triple J1. If we go to the top email, would it also be fair to then say that there is not the huge differential between the wages paid to RDOs in other companies and the RDOs paid to, and the wages paid to RDOs at Lonman?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I think what Mr. Van As wants shown on the screen is Mr. Ramaphosa's reply to Mr. Nkube, which is higher up on that page. There it is, that's it.
Yes, that's right.
Is that a fair?
It would be a fair
statement to put?
That's true. Fair statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Those are my only questions for Mr. Ramaphosa.
Thank you. Mr. Mpofu.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, Mr. Ramaphosa.
Good morning, Advocate Mpofu.
I think that without wasting time, I must also make a few declarations that, yes, somewhere, that you and I go quite a long way. I think we met in 1980.
You go back quite a long way.
Quite back, go back quite a long way, yes. We met in 1983, I remember, when at somewhere at Israel Gold Mining, when yes. I was a student engineer, aspirant mining engineer or metallurgist, and you were canvassing there for the NUM. That's yes. more than 30 years ago, but 31 years ago.
And you didn't join the union?
I didn't, yeah. Unfortunately, but I helped. I had already done that. Well, in 1981, I was a strike leader in East London, but that's another story. To cut a long story short, then the last encounter that we had was about 2 years ago, 30 years later, in the disciplinary hearing that was referred to by General Mbombo. Remember that one?
How can I forget that one?
Thank you. And in between those 30 years, countless occasions that you and I have worked together. Notably, you were my chairman of the National Reception Committee.
Indeed. For
political leaders. Now, that, well, that's not the last nicety. There's another nicety that's still coming, so that we just get rid of the niceties here.
What's the opposite of nicety? a nasty. Is that, are we going to have the nastities after that?
That will be the rest of the language person. No, we won't go that far. The other issue that I really wanted to canvass with you in this light is, I think I'm going to level quite substantial criticisms against you towards the end of the cross-examination. But I think that it's important to start the cross-examination on a positive note. And I will start it with quite a compliment on what you said in an article that is on page 338, Chairperson, of the LRC bundle.
Yes, well, so that's what the ready exhibit. We made the whole bundle of exhibits. So
yes, we made it quadruple J8, Chairperson. Was it? Yes.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. That's quadruple, yes. Quadruple J8, and it's page
338, Chairperson.
338, yes, okay.
You remember this is an article you wrote in the Sunday Times about the Marikana massacre, yes. Or tragedy, yes. I'm just going to read a few paragraphs just for context. The first paragraph, in the first paragraph you say, the events at Marikana last week present probably the lowest moment in the short history of a democratic South Africa. The scene, reminiscent of an age which thought had long been left behind, have shaken the nation to its core. You obviously still agree with that?
Yes, I do.
And then let's jump 2 paragraphs. You say the paragraph that starts with much has. You see that?
Yes.
Yeah. It's much has been written about the confluence of circumstances that led to the deaths of 44 people. The Judicial Commission of Inquiry established by President Jacob Zuma will shed light on how the events unfolded. Both the public commentary and the inquiry are essential to our efforts to understand what has happened, but they will be meaningless if we are not able to find the resolve and courage to attend to the flaws in our society that these events have exposed. You obviously still agree with that.
Yes.
And then the next paragraph, you say, the events at Marikana have revealed in the starkest terms possible the extent to which violence has become the language through which discontent is articulated and disagreement mediated. Such is the depth of grievance and such is the extent of popular alienation that to some, peaceful forms of protest seem ineffective. For a nation that owes its democratic dispensation to its ability to solve what was seemingly an intractable conflict, this is a devastating realization. Then the next paragraph, you say, it is not sufficient to bemoan this development. We need to act now to address it. We need to attend both to the mechanisms through which we resolve conflict and to the broader question as to how those in positions of responsibility interact with and are guided by the needs and interests of the working people and communities. And then later I say, in the early 1990s, in response to escalating political violence, diverse parties came together to negotiate the National Peace Accord with mechanisms for independent monitoring and mediation. There is much that can be learned from that experience. The current situation suggests the need for a society-wide effort to promote peaceful resolution of conflict. We need to reclaim our capacity to negotiate. Later on, I'll just paraphrase, you talk about effective communication, the need to, the ability to listen. And then you say the democratic dispensation we live in today requires that companies also need to be more engaged with the communities in which they operate. They need to be sensible to their needs and ensure that they are able to respond to their concerns. And it goes on, and you say, underpinning the factors, the next page, 1, 2, 3, 4, fourth paragraph, underpinning all the factors that led to this strategy are extremes of economic inequality, poverty, underdevelopment, and that continue to characterize our society today. The conditions on the Platinum Belt in the Northwest resemble those in many communities and so on. But the most important paragraph is the one just before the last one. You say there are few innocents in this tragic space. Those who suffered the greatest loss, the wives, the partners, and children of those who died, bear the least responsibility for what happened. The rest of us will find it harder to make such a claim. This must include the Lonmin management, the board, and all its shareholders, the National Union of Mine Workers, the Association of Mine Workers and Construction Union, AMCU, the South African Police Service, and the striking miners themselves. And if you allow me, I could add the government. Would that be acceptable?
Yes.
Thanks. And you say, for wherever we find ourselves, we cannot escape that through our action or inaction. We bear some responsibility for the circumstances that made such a tragedy possible. As we mourn, so too we must we introspect. You still stand by that as well?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Well, I read that in detail because I think it's going to make the cross-examination, it will cut a lot of ground that we would have covered in the cross-examination. In that, what it looks like here is that, at the very least, you accept your share of the responsibility for the massacre or for the tragedy. Is that correct?
Yes.
Obviously, you also probably correctly say that this is not the kind of thing that can be laid onto one person or one institution and so on. So as much as you accept your share of the responsibility, you say that others should also do the same. Is that correct?
Well, as I've articulated before, even yesterday, and I did so in that article that you referred to, the tragedy that occurred at Marikana has to be approached as a collective failure by many role players, many stakeholders, And I don't think that many who had some role to play can say that they do not bear any form of responsibility. I think the responsibility has to be collective, and as a nation we should dip our heads and accept that we did fail the people of Marikana, particularly the families and the workers and those who died. We did fail them.
Yes. Right. No, that's fine. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, some of those parties who must share or not share that responsibility have either already been here or are still going to be here. So now we're going to deal with your responsibility since you are the one who's testifying at the moment. I'm sure that's acceptable. If you can say yes.
Yes, we should deal.
Thanks. Now, I just want to situate my cross-examination as follows. A lot has been said about your own failures or failure to exercise certain of the responsibilities that we know. There have been reference to your fiduciary duties as a board member, and also, I suppose, your moral duty as a person who has been in leadership and so on. You remember that?
Yes.
And so, given that and what I read to you, the only question really that we need to determine is the extent of your responsibility. Would you agree?
I don't know what that means, the extent.
Yeah, no, it means that if you and I agree that you accept some share of the responsibility, the only thing that remains is not to establish that, because that's established, is to establish the extent of that responsibility.
Chair, these are utterly abstract questions which are not helpful to anyone. If the learned friend wants to pursue the question of the Deputy President's responsibility, let him deal with matters that can be dealt with factually, but these general statements are just entirely unhelpful, and the editorializing is equally unhelpful.
Well, Chairperson, I'm not here to help anybody. I'm putting the cross-examination into context.
I thought you were here to help us, the Commission.
Yes,
but,
yes, I concede that, yeah. But anyone else must help themselves.
Can I just ask with just two questions? Do you accept, you talked about collective responsibility, do you accept, because this is the foundation that Mr. Mpofu is questioning, that to some extent you personally have some responsibility for what happened? That's the foundation of his cross-examination. What's the answer to that?
Yes, I've couched all this, and without being evasive, to say that we all have had a role to play, and somewhere along the line we may not have fulfilled those roles as we should have fulfilled them, and that is what I would say, yes, I accept.
So to paraphrase what you said, you and a lot of other people and institutions fell short to some extent.
Indeed.
Now what Mr. Mpofu wants to know from you is, would you be able, in order to help us, to define the extent to which you, in retrospect, because we all know that hindsight is 20/20, to what extent would you, with hindsight, say you fell short?
Is that what you would like me to deal with now?
Would.
Yes, I think, Mr. Chairman, I think the responsibility at the board level, as a non-executive board member of Lonmin, one should have sought to find out more closely the actual process of negotiating with the union. That I would concede I should have done. I should have probed that. And I should also I would concede, have looked more closely at the unintended consequences that flowed from paying workers a living out allowance and finally getting them to a point where they took the money and went to live in less than desirable accommodation, where they would face challenges of nutrition, challenges of having to pay a lot of money for transport. As companies, that is what we should have done. We should have looked more closely at where the workers live and how they live, because the living conditions that workers were exposed to is not something that I can proudly say that I would like to be associated with. In fact, they are appalling and they are inhuman, and that is what I should have paid, and indeed the board should have paid closer attention to.
Thank you. In fact, you had, of the parties that you have listed, that you say should share the responsibility, you were associated with about 6 of them. The only 2 you were not associated with were AMCU and the striking miners as strikers as such. Would you agree?
Yes.
You were associated with Lawman Management, associated with the board. You were a shareholder. You were associated with the National Union of Mine Workers. You had some dealings with SABC and the government. Correct?
I was not in government when all this happened.
Fair enough. You were not in government, but you were exchanging telephone calls with people in government.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm not sure, I know this is one of the issues we have to decide, but I'm not sure we can take it at this stage as a given that his contacts with the government, the ministers, and the police in themselves brought about a share of responsibility for him. It may be depending on the issues that are going to be covered later in your cross-examination.
Fair enough,
but it's not a given at this stage.
No, it's not.
It's one of the matters we have to anxiously consider.
Yes. Well, maybe I can short-circuit it by saying you were a senior member of the governing party, the ANC, at the time, correct?
Yes.
Thanks. But we'll still develop that association. Now, what I'm going to seek to establish, in fairness to you, I must say this up front, so that we work together. It's not all the stories about fiduciary responsibility and all that which you've just dealt with now. I'm going to suggest at the end that the extent of your responsibility is not confined to that, but should also extend to criminal liability. You understand that?
I hear you.
Yes. And therefore, this discussion is just going to be at another level, at that level, not about some moral duty that you might have failed to do, although we'll touch on those, but it will be to driving towards that point. Now, in order, and just for clarity's sake, so that nobody misunderstands what I'm saying, what I'm saying is not that the commission is not empowered to say whether you are criminally guilty or not. That's not its purpose. That can be determined by another forum. All the commission can do, or at least all I can say to the commission, is that they must make a recommendation for another forum. We understand each other. Yes?
Chair, just on a point, if no part of your remit concerns questions of the attribution of criminal liability, can't imagine...
One of the questions we have to consider is possibly making recommendations to prosecution authorities
Yes.
for consideration by the provincial director of public prosecutions, I take it primarily, of possible prosecutions of various persons. So I think that's what Mr.
That's the
Wolf is
distinction I'm
alluding
drawing.
to.
I had understood my learned friend to say that that was not what he considered to be relevant for your purposes, but if it is, then he must make it plain that that's what he wishes to suggest you should do.
Well,
Yeah.
he can look after himself, but my understanding was he was saying correctly,
Yes.
it's not for this commission to find anybody guilty. The most that we are called upon to do in that area is to consider whether it's appropriate for us to recommend
That's all.
consideration, not even recommend prosecution, but to recommend consideration by the prosecution authorities of particular persons for particular alleged offences.
Just so that we're plain that that is what my learned friend is seeking to establish for the purposes of making, you're in due course making such a recommendation. If that is what he's doing, then fine, we at least know what the terms of this exchange are about.
That's what I understood him to say, but I may have
That's exactly what I
misunderstood.
said, Chairperson. I don't understand this. That's exactly, when I used the word recommendation, I was using it in that context. Yes. Yeah.
So I correctly summarised the point you
You
put in.
did,
So
you
I didn't
did.
misunderstand you on that issue. at least.
No, you didn't, Chairperson. No. And you understand what that distinction after that debate, Mr. Ramaphosa, correct?
I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, no, okay, I'll help you. One of the terms of references that the President has given to the Commission is for it to make recommendations for certain aspects or outcomes to be referred to other agencies. And that includes the prosecuting authorities. So I was saying to you, when I'm going to talk to you about criminal liability, it's not as if at the end of this commission I'm now going to say, well, Mr. Ramaphosa is guilty of this and that, and therefore, Mr. Chairman, you must find him guilty. That's not the purpose or powers of this commission. It would only for them to refer it to another place. Do you understand now?
I do.
Thank you. Now, in order to circumscribe then our discussion, for me to be able to make that recommendation at the end.
I'm going to make the submission and you're going to ask us to make the recommendation.
Yeah, of course. Yes, without usurping the powers of the chairperson. For me to motivate for that recommendation to be made, I would have to lay the basis for 4 broad things or themes which I'm going to canvass with you in this cross-examination. You understand? Mm-hmm. The first one would have to deal with things that you did, physical actions or inactions that you must have performed. You understand that?
Yes.
The second broad category would have to deal with your state of mind, your intention, and so on. You understand that?
Yes.
For sure. And thirdly, one would have to deal with what we lawyers call causality, the connection between what you did and the consequences. The consequences, in this case, the consequences are the deaths of people and their injuries and so on. You understand that?
Yes.
And then, of course, it's the outcome, which I've just mentioned. And that's easy. I don't have to establish that. We all know that people died, others were injured, and so on and so on. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So let's start then with just a few of the things which are relevant to what I'm going to ask you about, which you have done or you have agreed to having done. It's just a list in no particular order. Number one, you made a call to Mr. Zokwana, correct?
Yes.
Which has been referred to. So I'm using shorthand. I'm not going to say on such and such a date. You know what I'm talking about. Secondly, you made a call on the 12th of August to Minister Mtetwa.
Yes.
Thirdly, you made a call around the 14th of August to Minister Susan Shabangu.
Yes.
Fourthly, you made another call on the 15th of August to Minister Mtetwa.
Yes.
Number 5, you, and this is almost like a question, in order to arrange the meeting in Cape Town, you must have made another call to Minister Shabangu or her PA.
Yes.
Correct? Yeah. 6, you made a call to the ANC Secretary General, Gwede Mantashe, or had a discussion with him. Might not have been a telephone call.
Yes.
Yes. Then, 7thly, you had a meeting in Cape Town with Minister Shabangu.
Yes.
8, you had a call or a discussion with the Chamber of Mines.
Mr. Mike Jackie.
Mike Decker, yes. And you, and this one, you didn't participate directly, but you were made aware of a discussion subsequent to your discussions with Minister Shabangu that was going to take place in the cabinet and with the president, correct?
Can you just rephrase that one, please?
Were you, just a minute.
Reference is to page 18 of your bundle, triple B4, your email of the 15th of August at 2:58 p.m. to Mr. Jamison and others. And in paragraph 2 of that email, you summarize the discussion you'd had with Minister Shabangu by saying she's going into cabinet and will brief the president as well and get the Minister of Police, Nati and Petwa, to act in a more pointed way.
Yes.
The question is based upon that passage.
Okay,
That's correct.
That passage in the
I understand now.
Yes, and in fact, in your own statement, it's put much more clearer. Your statement is triple F 32. Is it? $13.5, Chairperson.
That's on page 23 of your bundle.
Yes, page 23 of the witness
fourth
bundle.
page of your statement.
There you say, Minister Shabangu agreed with Lomin's characterization of the situation, which we'll come to, and indicated to me that she would bring the matter to the attention of the cabinet and the president. Is that
Yes.
how you understood it?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and then number 10 is the, let's call it the email exchange that you had with Ms. Ngube.
Yes.
And then you had a similar email exchange with Mr. Mukwena.
Yes.
And then lastly, number 12, you had the famous email exchanges with Lonmin Leadership Board Chairperson and so on.
Yes.
Okay. So those are the 12 acts that I'm going to refer to. I'll call them the dirty dozen.
Before we get too fixated on the number 12, the evidence indicates that there, in fact, wasn't a cabinet meeting on the 15th of August, and Minister Shabangu is still going to come and tell us what she did on that day.
Yes.
But there wasn't a cabinet meeting.
There was a cabinet committee that's been established
I'm
by
saying
Mr.
there wasn't a
Mtetwa.
cabinet meeting. And according to the evidence of the Minister of Police, she didn't speak to him on that day, but certainly before the...
Yes.
So I'm not sure whether your dozen stands, but certainly 11 of the points you make are still there to be discussed.
Well, it wouldn't affect the dozen because the president is still there. So let's say there was no cabinet meeting, it was referred to the president, it's still a dozen.
Know whether she referred it to the president.
No.
That's the point.
That's-
So
I'm
that's what I'm
not
saying. I'm
saying-
not sure that one can accept the 12th point. I'm not saying it isn't correct, certainly there wasn't a cabinet meeting. Whether she spoke to the president or not is something
Yes.
there's no evidence about. She
Fair
will
enough,
be coming
Chairperson.
in due course. So,
I accept that.
So,
I accept that.
so perhaps it's be sensible to confine yourself to the 11 points that
No.
are common cause that took place.
Yes. No, Chairperson, all I was saying to the witness, which he has already agreed to, by the way, is that he was made to understand that those discussions would be escalated to the cabinet and the president, and that is the case. Whether indeed that happened is another matter.
Chairperson, just a brief one to deduct from the dozen of my learned friend. There was no telephone conversation between Minister Mteto and the witness on the 15th.
I said that I thought there wasn't. There certainly wasn't one before the shootings. But yes, that's also a factor to be borne in mind. But anyway, you've got enough material to cross-examine on for the time.
Yes.
Time it's been allotted to you.
Yes, but I was saying, yes, Chairperson, we'll fill the dozen. Maybe one should have done what is called the baker's dozen, so that
This dozen is 13, isn't it?
yes, so that you have a spare wheel. Yeah, but be that as it may, the point really is that this is a cluster of acts, whatever we call it. We're still together, Mr. Ramaphosa.
Yes.
Yes. Now, we are then going to deal with those. Let's put that issue aside for now, because I want to deal with an issue that doesn't quite fall into those 4 categories that I spoke about, so that we get it out of the way. You are familiar, you must be, with the whole notion of conflict of interest. Yes?
Yes.
And you are aware that it is undesirable for one to act when they are conflicted in various situations. I'm just talking generally now.
Yes.
Yes. And sometimes those breaches of those conflicts might even be unlawful, depending on whether it's a breach of articles of association or a statute or the Constitution. Agreed?
Well, in the situation of articles of association, yes.
Yes.
Or breach of a statute, yes.
Yes, of course, yes. Thank you. Now, just on the actions that basket of actions that we've spoken about, you were let me put it this way: you regarded yourself as you were regarded correctly as a person who's associated with NUM, a former leader of NUM who has some direct relationship with them. Correct?
Yes.
And when you had your telephonic discussions, which I referred to in the emails, with Mr. Zokwana, Mr. Mutlatsi, and people like that, you were doing so in that capacity.
Yes.
Right. At the same time, you were communicating with Lonmin management.
Yes.
Where the NUM was the recognized union, correct?
Yes.
And at the same time, you were a shareholder of Lonmin.
Yes. Shanduka.
Of Shanduka, yes, which is a shareholder in Lonmin.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Eventually, it's a shareholder in Lonmin, correct?
Well, indirectly.
Indirectly.
Yes. Thank you. And it holds 9% of Lonmin.
Yes.
About.
Of Lonplatz, yes.
Yes, of Lonplatz, yeah.
Much less of Lonmin itself.
Yes, of PLC.
Yes.
Yeah, fair enough. And at the same time, you are also having discussions, as we've established, with Mr. Mantashe.
Yes,
And you are a member of the National Executive Committee of the ANC.
that is true.
And as we've already established, the ANC is the governing party.
Yes,
And at the same time, you had your relations with Mr. Tetwa, among other things, were that you were both in the National Executive of the ANC,
yes, that's correct.
as well as Mr. Mantashe.
Yes.
What am I leaving out? And you were a non-executive director of Lonmin.
Yes.
Now, if you look at that web of
Relationships.
relationships,
Yes.
thank you,
Yes.
you would accept that then you were caught up in a cesspool of incestuous relationships in
Sure, that
relation to the players.
Chair, that is not a proper question to put, not only by the use of adjectives which are unhelpful in elucidating what question is being put, but if my learned friend wants to suggest that something about these relationships gives rise to a conflict of interest, he has to articulate what were the duties and that are relevant to his question and what are the interests with which they conflict. Absent any such specification, that is not a question that is properly put or helpful to anyone.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman, could I also
that's
say
a fair
that
question.
I do take exception to a question that seems to suggest that my relationship with my organization, the African National Congress, is incestuous.
No.
I also similarly do take exception to a suggestion that my relationship with the Secretary General of the ANC is incestuous, and all the other colleagues that you referred to. Mr. Chairman, I do take exception to that.
Yeah, that might well be.
Give me-
Yeah, I'll remember.
There are 2 points. The first point is incestuous was an unhappy word, which I take it you will withdraw. The second point is that you should spell out what the nature of the conflict was. Just a vague phrase like the one you used, even shorn of that objectionable adjective, is still unhelpful.
I've already said I'm going to do that.
Well, you put the general question expecting an answer. So put to the witness clearly what the conflict, or conflicts, I think implicitly what you're putting to the witness is there were several conflicts.
Yes.
Spell out what the conflicts are. Don't use objectionable adjectives, and we will make progress.
Well, this witness is an expert in using adjectives like dastardly. So I will try and restrain myself.
Let's not
That's fine.
engage in debate of that kind.
All right, we'll get there. From your experience,
Sorry, is this going to take some time? I was proposing to take the first comfort break now. I thought I'd wait until this point was finished, but it looks to me as if it may
Yes,
take a bit of
Chairperson,
time. So if it's convenient for you, I don't want to do anything that's inconvenient for you, but if it's convenient for you, shall we take the first comfort break now?
Yes, it is, Chairperson, because there are many relationships.
That's right. Quarter of an hour break.